This week, Patrick and I talk about ninjas and cowboys in the comics of the U.S. and Japan. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for keeping this show going. Join them at patreon.com/deconcomics. With our new tiers, you can now hear full-length extra content for only $4 a month. Details later in the show. If Patreon isn't in your budget, you can also send a one-time donation of any amount via PayPal to donate@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support. This is Tim.
And this is Patrick.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo, and I'm talking with Patrick down in Kumamoto here in Japan. How are you doing?
Good. We're down in the deep south.
Well, you grew up in the deep south, didn't you?
Yes, that is correct.
Of a different country.
That's right. So my daughter speaks Japanese and English, but she also speaks two different kinds of Southern.
Oh, interesting.
Japanese and American.
I see. She have a Kyushu twang, does she?
He has a pretty serious Kyushu dialect going on. You know, she doesn't say shinaide, like don't do that. She says sende.
Oh.
Which is much different. You know, everything's a lot shorter. You know, instead of saying ikanai to ikenai, they say ikan to iken. So everything is kind of truncated, and which I find very fun to use and convenient. Because you can get a lot of information out the door really quickly when it's truncated.
Right, yeah. Tokyo Japanese is really proper and everything, but yeah. Okay, so so Patrick, well, we recently recorded an episode of Spider-Man 1963 for Patreon, which isn't up yet. That's for issue 6.
Yes, that's correct.
So that'll come out March 28th. But in the meantime, so Patrick has been giving some presentations at the Kyushu Manga Museum. Is that, am I
close? It's
Kumamoto?
Koshi Manga Museum, which is in Kumamoto, a little bit north of downtown.
Okay, on the island of Kyushu. So that was where I was. That's why I guessed Kyushu. And so he was telling me about the topics, and I thought these sounded like good podcast fodder. So for this episode, we're talking about American samurai and Japanese cowboys in comics. Or do I have that right?
Well, ninjas. Ninjas.
Ninjas.
Ninjas versus cowboys. I actually subtitled my presentation "How the U.S. Sees Japan and How Japan Sees the U.S." But because of the group that I'm involved with that helped make the manga museum happen. It just opened a year and a half ago. They're really involved with ninjas from last year. And what happened was they introduced me to this particularly interesting collection of ninja comics called Ninpo Juban Shobu, which is like 10 different ninja arts competitions, or I'm translating it really badly, but it's basically 10 different comics about ninjas by 10 different manga artists, many of which are like huge manga artists. Like you've got Fujiko Fujio, one of the duo that created Doraemon. You've got Matsumoto Reiji, Leiji Matsumoto, as Matsumoto Akira, his original name. You've got Jiro Kuwata, the guy who did Batmania. the bat manga. I mean the Japanese Batman.
The Japanese Batman. Okay, yeah.
Yes, you've got Sanpei Shirato, who is like the king of ninja comics. He did Kamui, the Kamui Gaiden, which was published in English back when I was in high school and college. And you've got Ishinomori Shotaro Ishimori, the guy behind Kamen Rider and Inazuman and all, like a whole bunch of tokusatsu like comics that became live action TV shows, and of course Cyborg 009. And finally you've got Mitsuteru Yokoyama, who is famous for I think it was Gigantor, the robot animated show, black and white. They call it Tetsujin Niju Hachigo, but he also did like the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and very prolific guy. So they all did this, and they came together for this one volume of 10 ninja stories. And when I looked at this particular selection of guys, I realized that a bunch of them had done Western comics.
Western, like Cowboys.
And so I thought, now, wait a minute. There's a link. So that's what I kind of...
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've often heard Cowboys and Samurai compared, but Cowboys and Ninja is a little bit less common pairing, I think.
Yeah, and you'd be right, because but it depends on what kind of gunfighter you're looking at, I suppose. Samurai is all supposed to be about honor and stuff, but gunfighters, the white hats might be, but you've also got the black hats to deal with.
You were telling me before we started recording that you had a personal interest in ninja from your background.
Yes. I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, and I was an early teen when the 80s started getting going. And right about that time, ninjas were starting to become a thing for the first time. You were started to see them in everything. And one of the places that you would see ninja material is at the bookstore. There was a whole series of ninja books by Stephen K. Hayes. And Stephen K. Hayes was one of 3 Americans that went to Japan to train at a ninja school. And then he came back and wrote a whole bunch of ninja books, about one a year for a decade. And you could see them at like every bookstore in the martial arts section. It's funny, there wouldn't always be a horror section, but there was definitely a martial arts section in every bookstore. So anyway, he was like the first guy. And the second guy, Bud Malmstrom, went back to his hometown of Tucker, Georgia, and opened a ninja school. And I happened to live in that area. I went to Tucker High School, and immediately I signed up, me and my best friend, and we were ninjas in training. And we even found ourselves in a picture in Black Belt magazine way back 1986. And so that's my secret ninja history. But it was about that time that I saw my first U.S. ninja comic, which was a collection of Frank Miller's Elektra stories that were in Daredevil. And it was called the Elektra Saga. And Marvel printed them like in 4 installments. And they were timed almost exactly to come out the same time as The Dark Knight Returns. And I was not buying superhero comics at that time. I was buying Japanese comics, and I was buying horror comics, maybe some fantasy stuff. But when I saw ninjas on this Elektra cover, I went, well, I got to have that. And at the time, I didn't know who Frank Miller was. So Elektra was my introduction to American Ninja Comics and Frank Miller. And Frank Miller basically was American Ninja Comics.
Right. Well, I mean, he is one big factor in the popularization of kind of Japanese sort of martial arts in comics in America, I think. I mean, before we recorded this, I want to say reread the first time I read it was 35 years ago, Frank Miller's Ronin, Ronin to us, we who speak Japanese, which doesn't have any ninjas in it, really. It has a samurai. But, yeah, and then, of course, he was doing Daredevil at that time, too. And I think around that time he might have also done a story of Wolverine in Japan. So, well, I mean, he was really drawing, getting people interested in it.
I would say that this first scene with...
Oh, yeah, the guys with the baskets on their heads.
Yes, with the kind of faces covered, that these could easily be considered shinobi no mono, or, ninja.
Yeah, Patrick's got a copy of Ronin in his hand there that he just showed me.
After Elektra, that's when I decided to get Ronin, and it blew me away. Just the art and the coloring, and it's very tight. And because of because it's not necessarily a real direct story about Japan in the past, and it's more about this one guy's vision of Japan in the past that he learned through movies. That he's kind of created like a virtual idea of what it is. I mean, I guess there's a couple of different ways you could read it. Is it actually the souls of samurai from the past, or is it all in his mind? But it's very tight. I mean, it's I've seen a lot of Japan focused comics since then, and you have to take a lot of them with a great big chunking spoons of salt,
Well, back on the old globalcomics.net site that I used to do back around the time, well, even before the podcast started, I had done a feature on Japan in Marvel Comics, and all the weird takes on Japan that they had in various series. I got a lot from the Captain America #1 that came out after Heroes Reborn, and then beginning what they called Heroes Return. And this goes back to, what was it, Onslaught, when the heroes all disappeared for a year, and the Image guys came in to do their books. And when Cap came back to Marvel Earth, he showed up in Japan for some reason. But as typical of Marvel Japan, it looks, and it's weird because, World War II is so important in the sort of formation of the Marvel universe, because, Captain America and Namor and, Ben Grimm and Reed Richards were supposed to have fought in World War II. And yet the Japan of more, recent Marvel comics seems like a Japan that never had the Meiji Restoration. Because they've still got, all these Japanese royalty and, like, the emperor still exists, but none of that other sort of gentry. What's the word I'm looking for?
Well, you have aristocrats, but they're not like
aristocrats, but
they're not like lording over fiefdoms or anything.
Lords and ladies and that kind of thing. Like what's Sunfire, I think, is a Japanese lord,
yes.
Which there is no such thing in modern Japan.
Well, that's one thing that I was kind of looking at when I did a related topic about like racially mixed, like Japanese and other racially mixed characters in like I kind of touched on it in a different lecture, and it's like every Asian character has to have some kind of super heritage. Mm-hmm. It's like everything's genetics, you know? You can't have honor and you can't have incredible skill unless your ancestors had that skill. That's how the Asian characters were basically treated in these comics. They always had to have some extreme heritage to to validate them, which is it's an interesting thing that kept happening again and again, but it's I think it kind of comments on well, it's a shortcut for storytelling.
Yeah.
But anyway, like the 80s were crazy with ninjas. I remember I went to see Revenge of the Ninja, which had basically a white ninja. It was Franco Nero, Italian, Django, the original Django. And Franco Nero is a white ninja who dresses in white and and uses all the ninja tricks, and he fought against the bad guy who was played by Sho Kosugi.
Okay.
And Sho Kosugi basically would be the bad guy ninja and also like the technical advisor. What I found out was that for Revenge of the Ninja, they had actually brought in the Masaaki Hatsumi, or who was the ninja teacher of my teacher and Stephen K. Hayes. They brought him into... Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm mixing that up. They brought him in to do the James Bond film, You Only Live Twice.
Okay.
Because in You Only Live Twice, a whole bunch of gray ninjas show up. And actually, the first ninjas in Western comics are in the newspaper print edition of the You Never Live Twice. Those are the first.
The comics adaptation.
Yes.
Okay.
In Britain.
Okay.
Yeah. So okay, that's the one they brought him in, but because they fiddled with what ninjas were so much, he quit and left. Yeah, because in the end they didn't really look much like ninjas. But anyway, Sho Kosugi versus Franco Nero blew my mind, but it was the next film. No, it was Enter the Ninja. Oh boy, I'm getting this all confused. Enter the Ninja was with Franco Nero. Revenge of the Ninja is when they had Sho Kosugi play the hero, and which that was kind of cool because you had Bruce Lee and you had Jackie Chan, who both did a few movies as the hero, and then now you had Sho Kosugi. So there's just a very few Asians who are allowed to be the protagonist in a major film. Of course, this wasn't really major; it was canon. That movie production company, Canon.
Oh, okay.
They made like Missing in Action with Chuck Norris and Octagon and all these things. Anyway,
okay.
With this topic, it's very easy to get sucked into a million different side topics. So I'm going to try to keep it focused.
Okay.
But so Frank Miller was kind of legitimizing the ninjas as major mystical badasses. And then right away, a parody comic came out. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It was about four turtles.
Yes.
Who were teenagers that mutated. I don't know if you've heard of this one.
Right.
But
it was a parody of Daredevil and Teen Titans and X-Men initially.
Basically, it already brought about the demise of the ninja as a legitimate bad guy just when it was getting started. So I totally blame the turtles for turning the ninjas into the goofy badasses of the week, you know. So screw them turtles.
Yeah, I mean, who I remember when that started in the 80s. I didn't pay much attention to it, but I never anticipated that it would become this big, kids cartoon thing, go beyond the idea of parodying anything. And I'm sure the creators didn't either.
Well, I think they were very sharp, and they really, they went for it with gusto, kind of selling the idea. And yeah, of all the things that hit, it did. So, but I mean, if the ninja aspect wasn't in there, it definitely would have been the hit it was. And, I think they owe a lot of gratitude to the groundwork that Frank Miller laid in the comic scene. And then you have those Sho Kosugi movies. And then you have the novels like The Ninja, these erotic martial arts novels by Eric Van Lustbader.
Okay.
And his series, he did a ninja series, and there were these other really cheap-ass executioner-style series of books like Men's Adventure called Ninja Master, and they both feature white ninjas, like the Franco Nero thing. So it's like a lot of the ninja tales that you had in the States, would not be from a Japanese character's point of view.
Well, and I'm also thinking that, I don't know about ninja so much, but you remember Shogun, the novel, and then the TV miniseries with Richard Chamberlain? The main character?
Yes.
Blackthorn. I read the novel later. I never saw the TV version, but yeah, Blackthorn is the main character, a British guy who becomes a samurai. And then much later, Tom Cruise becomes a samurai.
The very last
samurai.
The last white samurai. I think they should. I don't know if they. Yeah, man, that Shogun thing, when that came on TV, of course, my eyes were locked, and there were some, like Mifune Toshiro. I think that might have been the first thing I'd seen him in. Toshiro Mifune, the guy that's been in like a whole bunch of the Kurosawa's movies, and basically the West's image of samurai is Toshiro Mifune. So that miniseries was, definitely. I was checking the TV guide. What time's that coming on? So these the ninja boom in comics. It saw the birth of like one of the first American manga series, which was Ninja High School. Where the artist was very much trying to Ben Dunn, I think it was, very much trying to use the Japanese style, and these U.S. ninja comics were interesting, but when I actually picked up my first ninja comic, Japanese ninja comic, there was whole huge areas of ninja lore which never really got touched on in U.S. comics. They focused on completely different aspects, I think.
How so? Yeah.
Well, in the evolution of ninja comics in Japan, there was a period where it was basically ninja on ninja was the focus. And they all had different secret arts. And I think the modern popular ninja comics like Naruto and this kind of thing likely benefited from this period. But we're talking like the 60s and the 70s and such. A whole bunch of just ancient lore. And the first comic that I read, Japanese ninja comic, was Kamui Den. And that was created by Sanpei Shirato. And he's basically the most popular ninja comic artist. And the series that he created, I think it's called Iga Ninja Bugecho, which is like the secret manual of the Iga Ninja or something like this. He created as a rental comic back in the 50s when people couldn't really afford to buy comics, so they would go to a rental shop and rent a comic. And he did a one-shot, book-sized comic, a couple 100 pages, and oh no, actually that was a series. So he did this series, and it was extremely popular, and it kind of made his career. And he went on to do Kamui after that. And Kamui was one of the comics that was translated into English back in the late 80s. Like there was Lum, and there was Mai the Psychic Girl, and there was Area 88, and there was Kamui. And but the style that he used for that Kamui was actually a lot rougher. It was like a later iteration of the comic that I bought when I was 15.
We should also mention Lone Wolf and Cub, which, as I recall, Frank Miller facilitated getting that published in English around 1983, 4, something like that.
Well, Lone Wolf and Cub, the artist for that, actually worked very closely with the artist for Kamui. And they worked on each other's books all the time. Apparently, there's some books where you can't tell whose art is whose. Well, I can't tell. My manga expert friends assure me that they can tell.
I see.
But I haven't got to that level of ninjutsu yet.
Okay.
But that team, Lone Wolf and Cub, was wow, it was such an amazing story. And the writer of that, Kazuo Koike, what I found out recently, last year actually, is that he had also written the very short-lived official Japanese Hulk comic, where the Hulk is, he's the same sad character, but he accidentally, like Frankenstein, he accidentally kills a little girl, and so the kids in the neighborhood, they take up arms against him, and they chase him into the river, and he's never seen again. All the while calling him things like Ocean Gorilla. He's gorilla, but he's green, so Ocean Gorilla? I don't know. Anyway.
Okay.
But that guy was doing 20, 30 series, writing different series at a time. And Lone Wolf and Cub is probably his most successful international series. But there's another series he did with Kojima called Kei no Seishun. which I call like the exciting youth of K, and it's such a good story. We'll have to talk about that in a future episode because it's too much to get into.
Okay,
Here.
I'll make a note of that, and we can maybe do it just to talk about just that comic.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anything else to say about the ninjas, particularly in American comics, before we get to the Japanese cowboys?
Well, I think that how Americans see ninjas. What kind of adjectives would you use? Like sneaky, skilled, smart, silent.
Right,
deadly.
but aren't they like that in Japanese comics too?
Not.
Yeah. What's the difference between a Japanese comic ninja and an American comics ninja?
That is a good question. I think it's not sneaky as much as like silent. You know the difference. Like they're on a mission. Like one of the popular TV shows that was here, Hisatsu Shigoto Nin. In that one, the main characters are basically assassins, and but they're not seen as those sneaky devils that attacked Pearl Harbor. You know what I mean? They're seen as, they're very good at what they do, and they're quiet and they're stealthy, not sneaky.
Well, and I think in Japanese stuff, the maybe one of the more important elements for Japanese, ninja or samurai comics is discipline, where in American comics it's power, strength. And I think there's a little bit of a difference there, like what the emphasis is.
Definitely. I mean, like if you look at the hand in the Daredevil comic, I mean, don't they kind of want world domination?
Yeah, right. They're a force to evil force to be dealt with, and they can do magic and all this kind of crazy stuff.
Black magic.
Yeah,
Black magic.
Yeah.
Whereas, like in Japanese comics, in many cases, let's say, these ninjas are working for the people in charge. They don't have their own agenda, except for to keep their secrets and do their jobs and not, and be loyal. This kind of thing. So loyal, that's something that we would see as a positive thing. But I think in the Western view, ninjas were like those dirty, sneaky rats,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Coming up, cowboys in Japanese comics, some of them exploring issues like racism. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support.
Welcome to the Superman Fan Podcast. My name is Billy Hogan, and I will be your host. Before we begin our journey through the time barrier, please ensure that your red indestructible capes are securely fastened around your necks so that we may all travel safely into the past to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, and World's Finest Comics. After we return from our journey, I encourage you to go to the website, thesupermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com. I look forward to have you join me each week to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel.
But one interesting connection that I noticed was all these all these creators who were well known and were doing ninja comics also happened to be making Western comics. And so that's kind of where I connected the dots a little bit, and I started to look at cowboy comics in Japan, because now they're pretty rare. But for a certain time, there was a bunch of them.
And this is what, around the 60s?
Yes, 50s, 60s.
50s, 60s. Yeah, of course, there were a fair amount of American cowboy comics, in the 50s or maybe before.
Yeah, well, and the reason is similar. It's all the Western movies.
Yeah, that was all of a piece, and when one went, the other went too. They just kind of, the interest in cowboys in general declined.
Well, I think there was like 20. Okay, from 1930 to 1954, there were 2,700 westerns made in 24 years.
Made in Hollywood, or just in the States? Okay.
In the States, but yeah, mostly Hollywood.
Are we including the ones made in Italy too?
No, because those weren't from the 50s. Those came out in the 60s.
Okay.
But those comics didn't necessarily fuel a resurgence in Western comics in America, but they definitely fueled a resurgence in Western comics in Japan.
The spaghetti westerns.
Yes.
Did. So yeah, Americans were kind of done with it, but Japanese were more interested in cowboy comics again.
Yeah, and of course they didn't call them spaghetti westerns; they called them macaroni westerns. It's easier to say.
Interesting.
Yeah, so like Western comics go back pretty early, like 1949. There was a comic called Dangan Tommy, or Tommy Bullet Tommy, or something like this. And that was, it was a pretty popular. It was a gag kind of strip. Tezuka had made his first comic, his first Western comic, which was, I think, Gun Angel, Kenju Tenshi. And he had a female character and a male character kiss in that comic, and the PTA was up in arms. He didn't even think about it. But at the time, he had only seen one Western. And so he got into Western movies after that, and then he made several more stories with cowboy characters. Like one of them I have here, Cactus Kid is the Cactus Kid wants to turn his parents' saloon into a milk bar. And, he's all about keeping the peace. So that's also like a kind of a comedy thing. But when I was looking through some of these Western comics, Japanese Western comics, the black hats sometimes seem very similar to ninjas. Okay. They're like all in black, and they're very stealthy. So I feel like there was a little bit of mixing of genres. One theme that constantly shows up in the Japanese Western comics is the theme of the half-breed, the Apache, and the white mixed biracial child who has to deal with prejudice and overcome being an outcast from both his peoples and find his own way, kind of thing. And these are more a little bit later, like the 1960s, 70s comics. But
well, I wonder what caused Japanese creators to be interested in that as a theme.
Well, definitely, it was a theme in the westerns,
Okay.
and also post-war, they had their own. Uh, they had their own difficulties with how to handle biracial kids who were kind of left behind after war, like so-called GI babies, where, the father was a GI, got the woman pregnant, and then skipped town. And they were left with these children that nobody wanted to accept. Nobody wanted to admit they existed in the first place. And so, there was I think that they were very aware, at least a lot of comic creators at this time were quite progressive and interested in such topics. Tezuka was a very strong humanist. He often touched on human rights issues and this kind of thing. So I think for them it was a very interesting issue. They often use like a half Japanese character trying to make his way in America, in the Old West, on the frontier. The guy who did Kamui, Shirato Sanpei, he has this character called Shinigami Kozo Kim. And Shinigami is like Grim Reaper or, like Death Angel. And so it's this kid who, just mentioning his name and the whole town clears out. Because wherever he goes, death follows. And I was riveted reading through the story. You have the white woman, the Indian Native American husband, and their kid, and they're being hounded by the woman's father and the posse. And this guy Kim, he leads them into a place where they'll never be bothered again. But as the posse follows Kim into this area, they all, they don't heed his warnings, and they end up like drowning in this grotto filled with like poison water or something. It's really dark.
Yeah.
But the family survives. So he's kind of like those old TV series where the main character wanders into different situations and helps the people. Except in this one, a whole bunch of people die. He's a force, because he's like a force of nature.
He doesn't murder them, but just kind of his presence results in their death. Yes.
Like suddenly, earthquakes and natural disasters and wild animals, all kinds of things happen when this kid's around. So yeah, that's why people like moving to avoid him, leaving town to avoid this kid.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and you have things like Gun Frontier, which this chronicles basically the earliest meeting of Harlock, the future space pirate, and Tochiro, his katana-wielding best friend. And but in Matsumoto Reiji's comics, he basically, like, everybody's related. It's like this is like the grandfather of space pirate Harlock, or there's some connection, but it's not a connection you really should take. They're obviously based on the similar type of character, and they always have similar names. But this one was interesting. I mean, I really like the buddy dynamic that they have going on, but the way that women are treated in this comic is just deplorable. Even though the woman character is the one with the most agency. The guys just kind of follow along, like, what's going on? I don't know. I guess we're going this way now. Okay. And then the woman's kind of calling the shots, but she also ends up getting raped a lot, taken advantage of a lot. But somehow she's still the one that has the agency. But so it's, there's some problems with it, but there's also some really good things in here, which I think were quite interesting. The buddy friendship included.
Well, do you see any ways in which we were talking about how different aspects of ninjas were emphasized between the Japanese and the American versions? Are there differences in how the cowboys are portrayed between the two countries?
Yes. So, definitely, like, you've got lots of corruption, and which you do see in a lot of westerns. You've got the crooked,
sure,
the crooked sheriff, the crooked mayor, and but I think, these kind of crooked characters are seen to be. I think they could easily be echoes of what Americans can be seen as in general in the comics at this period. There were takers, reavers, rapers. Rapists.
Yeah.
There's desolation, wide spaces, like never-ending spaces. There's you have your hookers with the hearts of gold, but usually they don't survive.
Yikes.
So it's I don't know. I think, like, if you look at the Western comics for the States, it was very much a going with the times kind of thing. Like when Western movies those themes made their ways into comics. Suddenly, comics that were superhero comics became Western comics. Like Black Cat comics. This is a female superheroine.
There aren't any male superheroines, I don't think.
I know. Okay, she was a female superhero who, when the Western boom hit, her comics suddenly became Black Cat Western comics. And then I think it became Black Cat Spooky Stories, and there was a lot of real people, movie stars, that were the focus of Western comics. And and there was crossover with weird and scary tales and such. But I mean, both the ninja comics in the U.S. and the Western comics in Japan and the U.S., they were all highly influenced by movies, but I think different era movies. So, like you mentioned, the spaghetti westerns, those didn't really do much, didn't have much effect on the comics in the States.
Sure, yeah, the 60s comics were heading in the total superhero direction by that point.
Yeah, but in Europe and in Japan, there was a bunch of Western comics, and Western comics in Europe never died. They still are. They're still putting out Western comics that started back then, like Lucky Luke, and And do you know Blueberry, the Jean-Paul Giraud, the Möbius?
No, I don't.
Oh my God, it's so good. And there's some English translations. So if you get a chance to look at, I've got a couple. If you get a chance to read the Blueberry comics, it's very well written, beautifully drawn, European cowboy comics.
Interesting.
And those those European comics also did the half Apache, for some reason, half Irish every damn time. I don't know why. There's like 3 different half Irish, half Apache characters. But the way that they tackled these topics of racism was, they were handled with different levels of success, I think, but I think they were very well intentioned and not just exploitative. I can say that for the Japanese ones as well. Mm-hmm. But let me tell you my favorite one, though.
Okay.
My favorite Japanese cowboy comic is actually a science fiction comic called Captain Ken. It was somewhat recently translated into English, which I had very mixed feelings about, because I've been telling people this is my favorite Tezuka comic for years, and I've always enjoyed people going, I've never heard of that one before. and and when it was kickstarted successfully, I was a little like, that feeling, something like a fandom that you've nurtured for years and nobody's understood but you, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait a minute, now a whole bunch of people know this and it's not just mine anymore. And I'm glad
that was how I felt when U2 went mainstream.
So this has it all. This has time travel. This has robot horses. Basically, the Earth people, and mostly it's American corporation bad guys. These Earth people fly to Mars, and they want to take over Mars. And so to do so, they have to get rid of the indigenous population, which are an analog for Native Americans. In fact, they dress like Native Americans. And it's a very Western setting on another planet.
Okay.
And Captain Ken is the cowboy that's taken the side of the Martians. He's a traitor to his people. And but he's basically it's Avatar.
Okay.
And the American side hires a whole bunch of assassins and bounty hunters and stuff, and all kinds of cool stuff going on. Did you see?
Probably
what
not.
Is it? Last Jedi? Did you see the Last Jedi?
Last Jedi. Well, yeah, I've seen all the Star Wars movies. Wow, it's a movie I saw.
Yeah. Do you remember the leader of the basically the supposed terrorists that wore the mask? And I cannot remember her name.
I don't know. I'm blanking now. I saw the movie once when it came out, which is going on 2 years ago now.
Well, I think this character from Captain Ken looks just like her.
Okay.
Yeah, looks very similar. It's very interesting. Anyway, this always, the ending always gets me. Always gets me. But that one's a good one. It was so funny that I was able to find this particular collection of manga, which collects 3 different Western-themed comics in one set, which I came across it right as I was looking to do this lecture, so it's quite fortuitous.
And now this one is in Japanese?
Japanese.
Yeah.
Japanese. It's got Tezuka's Cactus Kid, and it's got the Tommy one that I mentioned, and it's also got the Grim Reaper Kid Kim. So.
Yeah. So do you have anything else you need to say to wrap up here?
Yes, I guess I think what happens every time that I delve into a particular subject in in Japanese comics, I feel like, okay, I can squeeze it down to this one topic, and it's all going to be fine. And then as soon as I start digging into a topic, I realize that it's massively huge, and that there's all these series that I didn't know about, and that have actually been around and were somewhat popular. And it happens to me every time. I think, okay, here's something I can talk about for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and I end up having to make it like an hour and a half deal, because there were just so many fly-by-night publishers in the 50s, but their works were highly distributed. And there's just so many different magazines and so many different one-offs, and just the field is incredibly huge. I guess it'd be like trying to dig through all the comics that have been made in the last 10 years, like Western comics. It'd be impossible.
Yeah.
You know? There's no easy resource. You just have to start digging, and then you find out more and more stuff. But a definite love for Western movies. When you read these comics, you really start wanting to watch some spaghetti westerns. There's all kinds of good spaghetti westerns that I'd never ever heard of.
Huh.
That I found, after I found a new love for westerns through these comics, and it's sustained me. Whenever there's something I want to watch, pop a good western in. Oh, here's something interesting. Leiji Matsumoto. I told you before, I got to meet him in person, right?
Yeah, I think I remember you putting that on Facebook or something.
So I asked him what was his favorite Western comic. And he said, well, I don't know about that, but I'll tell you my favorite Western movie. And that's Johnny Guitar. And I went, okay, yeah, I've heard of that. I think it's on my Netflix feed or something. So I recently finally watched Johnny Guitar. And it is the most bizarre Western I've ever seen. I mean, it's interesting, it's riveting, but it's not a typical Western at all. Basically, the final showdown is between two women, which I've never heard of in a Western.
No.
And apparently this was a pet project for Joan Crawford, who was in it. And I was looking at the review by Roger Ebert, and I have to agree that there's a lot there going on that it's not apparent at first. It seems to be a lot of kind of sexual tension that's, a lot of subtext, like lesbian subtext in the film itself. But he says that's his favorite Western. And looking back at some of his most interesting female characters, like Emeraldus, who I love, she's fascinating, and her stories and the Harlock stories, they seem to emulate that kind of, there's a lot of talking going on, but there's a lot of talking around all these things that happened in the past. And, and it never really comes 100% to the fore in that movie or in those comics. And so, he often mentions that women are a complete mystery to him. So I can see how he depended a lot on what he learned from the movies. But that was, anyway, that was an interesting linkage.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. There's one more thing that I have to mention okay. Because it's just too surreal. This is the comic that made me definitely have to do this topic. This is the black wild cow. Kuroi Yagyu. And Yagyu is also a famous ninja family.
Okay.
Okay, but Yagyu is also like wild bull. So yeah, he's like the black wild bull. It is a ninja turned cowboy. Isn't
Okay.
that awesome? Ninja turned cowboy. He goes to America and he starts fighting. These evil like army guys who all end up actually being ninjas. So it's like U.S. Army, a fort, but the corrupted captain of the army is actually an evil ninja and has trained all his people in evil ninja arts.
Okay.
And so you have the good ninja helping the Native Americans fight against the evil ninja in the Old West.
Okay.
Which happened all the time, apparently. I'm kidding. But isn't that... When I found this at the Mandarake in Shibuya, I was like, this cinches it. I have to talk about ninjas and cowboys. This is the one.
I don't suppose that one's been translated.
I don't think you need a translation. I think you just look at some of the things that's going on here and just let your mind be blown.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking here.
A bunch of army guys jumping out of the sand who are now ninjas, and this guy is one of the guys in this book of 10 ninja stories.
Huh.
And he did other ninja stuff, and he did other Western stuff. So I have him to thank for me trying to tie these things together.
And what's his name again?
This creator is called Taku Horie. Okay.
Okay.
Taku Horie. And I like his style. It's got a unique flavor to it, but it also seems to emulate like Andy Capp somehow.
Like a Lil Abner type of thing.
Yeah. Like the noses are, I think, different than many manga of the time.
Yeah.
And Little Abner was popular in Japan. It was influential.
I'm getting Andy Cap and Al Cap mixed up, but yeah.
What did I say?
You said Andy Cap. That was another comic strip. The British
Al Cap.
guy who
I
was
meant
always.
Al Cap.
You meant. I understood what you
Little
meant,
Abner.
even though you said the wrong name. Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. I meant Al Cap, Little Abner.
Yeah. Okay.
Who I think Leiji Matsumoto also mentions him as an influence, as does Tezuka, I think. But without my references in front of me, I'm afraid to say for sure. But yeah, he seemed to have a little bit. His style was a little bit different. And easy to pick out. Like, I mean, you wouldn't mistake his style for any other. Where you have his contemporaries were all trying to go for similar looks. So, yeah. Really glad I was, by pure luck, found this comic in the Mandarake.
So you weren't even looking for it. You just stumbled across it.
Just stumbled across it. And that's why I don't like ordering things off the internet, is that there's so much out there, so much, that for me, going to a used bookstore and kind of running across something is so much more special,
Yeah.
It's like fate.
Patrick's site is blog.patokon.com. That's Patokon. If you like deconstructing comics, critiquing comics, and To the Bat Polls and want to support these shows, pledge at patreon.com/deconcomics. We've just changed the lower pledge tiers. Previously, we had $1, $3, and $5. Now we start at $2, which allows you to get show outtakes and occasional other photos and videos. Then at $4 a month, down from $5, you can hear full-length content such as our ongoing series, Spider-Man 1963, a bi-weekly issue-by-issue look at the first year of everyone's favorite wall crawler. Your Patreon support gets you bonus content while supporting the making of our free content. If the need for other work is reduced, it'll be easier for me to make more free content. Show your support by backing us for $4 a month or more at patreon.com/deconcomics. Our email address is mail@deconstructingcomics.com, or contact us through social media. Find all the links on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. We have a pretty active Facebook group, so please sign up for some interesting comics discussion. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Mulele and I will be here next week with 2 more comics from listeners. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.